Hey, I'm really glad you're here. Take a moment to get comfortable wherever you are. Let your shoulders relax and let the day gently fall away. You don't need to do anything right now. Just listen and let the story unfold at its own pace. Whenever you're ready, we'll begin.
The Wizard of Valhalla Forest, the forest that should not exist. No map, no matter how old or carefully drawn, ever agreed on the location of Valhalla Forest. Some maps left a pale blank space where mountains should have been, as if the cartographer's hand had faltered. Others showed a smear of ink, a careless accident later scratched out. A few ancient parchments, those locked away in libraries that smelled of dust, candle wax, and regret, named the place only once and then never again, as though even ink feared repeating the word. Yet Valhalla Forest existed. It existed in the way storms exist before they are seen, in the way nightmares linger after waking. Villages rose and fell around its supposed borders. Kingdoms fought wars that shifted frontiers. Rivers changed their courses over centuries. But the forest remained, unmoving, unclaimed, untouched. Roads bent around it. Travelers detoured days, sometimes weeks, rather than risk passing too close. Even birds, it was said, altered their migrations when the forest's shadow reached the horizon. From afar, Valhalla Forest looked deceptively ordinary. A dense green mass pressed against the sky, its treetops forming a jagged crown. But the longer one stared, the more wrong it seemed. The green was too deep, almost black in places, like old bruises on the land. The light above it behaved strangely. Clouds slowed, sunlight dimmed, and shadows stretched longer than they should, as if time itself lost its certainty at the forest's edge. People told stories, as people always do when faced with the unknown. Some claimed the forest grew overnight after a forgotten god died and fell into the earth, his bones turning into roots, his blood into sap. Others swore it had always been there, older than the first fire, older than the first word spoken by a human mouth. The most disturbing tales insisted the forest did not simply exist, it remembered. Every footstep, every whispered prayer, every scream that ever crossed its soil was held within its bark and leaves, waiting. Children were warned with gentle lies at first. Don't wander too far, mothers said. The forest will lose you. When children grew older, the lies sharpened. The forest watches, elders muttered, and it does not give back what it takes. The bravest or most foolish souls laughed at such warnings. The hunters boasted that they would bring back antlers as proof. Merchants claimed shortcuts through the trees. Soldiers spoke of clearing it for timber. None of those men ever returned with proof. Some did not return at all. Others came back changed, eyes hollow, voices trembling, refusing to speak of what they had seen. A few were found days later wandering fields miles away barefoot, their hands stained with sap that would not wash off. Valhalla Forest had borders, but they shifted. One year the tree line stood a mile from the river. The next, it kissed the water's edge. Stones placed to mark safe ground were swallowed by roots. Paths remembered by generations simply vanished beneath moss and shadow. Farmers swore their fields grew smaller each season, though no deed or measurement confirmed it. When disputes arose, judges avoided ruling on land near the forest, as if law itself held no authority there. At dawn, mist crept from between the trees like breath from sleeping lungs. At dusk, the forest exhaled again, darker this time, carrying scents no one could name: iron, rain, old smoke, and something faintly sweet, like flowers growing on graves. Wolves never howled near it. Insects fell silent at its edge. Even the wind seemed reluctant to pass through, slowing to a whisper before dying completely. There was one detail every story agreed upon: the forest was not empty. Deep within Valhalla forest, beyond the twisted oaks and towering ash trees, beyond ravines where sunlight never reached the ground, lived a presence. Some called it a guardian, others named it a curse. A few dared to give it a title spoken only in murmurs: the wizard. No one knew when the wizard first appeared. Records from 300 years ago mentioned a hermit who glowed faintly at night. Scrolls older than that spoke of a man who bargained with thunder. The oldest legend, passed down through song rather than writing, claimed the wizard was not born but chosen, shaped by the forest itself to serve its will. Contradictions filled every account. He was young and ancient, kind and merciless, a healer and a destroyer. Some said he wore robes woven from leaves and moonlight. Others described armor of bark and bone. One drunken traveler insisted the wizard had no fixed form at all, that he appeared differently to each soul who met him, reflecting their deepest fear or desire. Despite the fear, temptation persisted. The Valhalla forest was rumored to grant impossible things. Crops grown near its border were unnaturally rich. Streams flowing from its depths healed wounds faster than prayer. Once, during a great famine, a desperate village sent 3 men into the forest with offerings of gold and livestock. Its only one returned, thin, trembling, alive. But the next morning the village awoke to overflowing granaries, though no one could explain how the grain arrived. The survivor never spoke again. Such stories spread beyond villages, beyond kingdoms. Scholars debated whether the forest was a natural phenomenon or a magical anomaly. Priests argued whether it was divine punishment or sacred ground. Kings considered conquest, then quietly abandoned the thought. Armies require roads, and Valhalla forest erased roads as easily as chalk lines in rain. Generations passed. Empires aged and collapsed. The forest endured. It endured fires that refused to burn its heart. It endured floods that parted around its roots. It endured men who came with steel, faith, or arrogance and left with none. And still it waited. On the northern edge of Valhalla forest stood a single stone marker, half buried and cracked by time. No one knew who placed it there. Its inscription had worn away, except for one word carved deep enough to survive centuries of weather and neglect: remember. Most villagers avoided looking at it. Those who did often felt a strange unease, as though the stone were looking back. Elders claimed the marker was older than their oldest songs. Some believed it warned travelers to remember who they were before entering the forest, lest the trees strip that memory away. Others believed it was a reminder from the forest itself. Remember what was taken, remember what was promised, remember what is owed. At night, faint lights sometimes flickered between the trunks, blue, white, and gold, moving with deliberate slowness. Fireflies, skeptics said. Reflections, scholars argued. Spirits, whispered those who knew better. And children dreamed of those lights, even if they had never seen the forest, waking with the taste of ash and honey on their tongues. Every few decades, something changed. The forest would grow restless. Animals fled its outskirts. The air thickened with anticipation, like the moment before a storm breaks. Old men felt it in their bones. Old women woke from dreams they could not explain, speaking names long forgotten. When this happened, elders gathered and spoke in low voices of cycles, of debts coming due. They said the wizard was stirring. And when the wizard stirred, Valhalla Forest did not merely exist, it acted. Branches fell across distant roads. Rivers flooded without rain. People disappeared in places far from the trees, leaving behind only footprints that ended abruptly, as if the earth itself had opened its mouth. The forest's influence reached outward, subtle but undeniable, reminding the world that its boundaries were not lines on a map, but living, breathing things. This was one such time. Unbeknownst to the villages at its edges, or the kingdoms beyond them, Valhalla Forest had begun to remember something it had long tried to forget. The roots whispered to one another beneath the soil. The leaves shuddered with half-formed thoughts. Deep in the heart of the forest, where no axe had ever struck and no prayer had ever fully reached, ancient magic shifted like a waking giant. A story that had begun centuries ago was preparing to continue. And somewhere beyond the forest's shadow, a single life, small, unnoticed, utterly unprepared, was drifting toward the place that should not exist. Valhalla Forest waited, the boy who heard the trees speak. The boy did not intend to go anywhere near Valhalla Forest. His name was Urendor, and until the day the trees spoke to him, his life had been painfully ordinary. He lived in the village of Greymark, a place known more for surviving than thriving. Stone houses leaned into one another as if for comfort, roofs patched with mismatched wood, streets forever dusted with ash from hearth fires that never fully went out. Greymark stood close enough to the forest to feel its presence, but far enough to pretend safety. A careful, nervous compromise generations had accepted. Urendor was 16 years old, though hardship had etched him older. His hands were calloused from work, his back slightly bent from carrying water and firewood since childhood. His father had died in a border skirmish year earlier, one of many names lost to history, and his mother followed not long after, taken by a fever that prayers failed to soften. Since then, Erendor lived with his aunt, a sharp-eyed woman who loved him fiercely but feared the world even more. She especially feared the forest. "Keep your eyes down when you pass that way," she would say whenever Erendor fetched herbs near the northern fields. "Don't listen if you hear things. The forest lies." Erendor always nodded. He always obeyed, until the night he didn't. It began with a dream, though dream was too gentle a word for it. He stood beneath towering trees whose leaves shimmered like glass, their roots pulsing faintly as if veins ran through them. The air vibrated with a low hum, not a sound exactly, but a presence. Then the trees bent toward him, branches lowering like arms, and a voice, many voices layered together, spoke his name. Not shouted, not whispered, known. Erendor woke gasping, his chest tight, his ears ringing. The room was dark, the familiar creak of the house steadying his breath. Yet something lingered, heavy and undeniable, like the echo of a bell long after it had been struck. From that night on, the forest followed him. When he walked near the northern fields, the wind shifted unnaturally, carrying murmurs just beyond understanding. Leaves rustled even when the air stood still. Once, while gathering firewood, he swore he heard laughter, deep, slow, and ancient, rolling through the trunks far beyond the tree line. He told no one. In Greymark, curiosity was a luxury and fear was tradition. Days passed, then weeks. The whispers grew clearer, not words at first, more like intention, a pull. A sense of direction tugging gently at his thoughts. He began taking longer routes home, lingering near the forest's edge under the excuse of collecting herbs or checking snares. Each time, he stopped short of crossing the boundary, heart pounding, torn between terror and something dangerously close to wonder. On the 7th week after the dream, the forest spoke plainly. Erendor had ventured farther than usual, chasing a wounded rabbit that disappeared into the tall grass near the stone marker. The sky was overcast, the air heavy, the kind of day when sound carried too well. He crouched listening when the world abruptly went silent. No wind, no birds, no breath but his own. Then a voice rose from the trees, not loud, not soft, but perfectly balanced, as though shaped to fit inside his skull. "You hear us at last." Erendor froze. His first instinct was to run. His legs trembled, muscles coiled to flee, but something rooted him in place. The voice was not threatening. It was curious, old, tired. Who's there?" he whispered, hating how small his voice sounded. The trees shifted, bark creaked, leaves trembled. "We are Valhalla." The name settled into him like a weight. I didn't mean to come too close," he said quickly, words tumbling over one another. "I'll leave, I promise." "You always promise," the forest replied. "Few ever listen." The stone marker beside him seemed to hum faintly, the carved word remember catching what little light filtered through the clouds. "What do you want?" Erendor asked, fear sharpening into desperation. There was a pause, long enough that he wondered if he had imagined everything. "You," said the forest. The ground beneath his feet warmed slightly, not burning, but alive. Roots shifted beneath the soil, rearranging themselves with deliberate care. You hear what others cannot. That makes you dangerous. I don't want to be, Urindor said honestly. I just want to live. A ripple of something like amusement passed through the trees. So did the others. Images flashed unbidden through his mind. Faces he did not recognize, eyes wide with hope or terror, standing where he stood now. Some turned away. Some stepped forward. All were gone. Are you going to kill me? He asked. No, the forest answered. We are not finished with you. Before Urindor could respond, the silence broke. Birds cried out. Wind rushed through branches. The ordinary sounds of the world crashed back into place as if nothing had happened. Shaking, Urindor fled home. That night he burned with fever. His aunt held him, muttering prayers, convinced he had caught something terrible from the damp fields. He drifted in and out of consciousness, dreams and waking blurring together. In his visions, roots coiled around his wrists, not binding, but guiding. As the forest showed him fragments, a tower of living wood, a figure standing beneath an ashen canopy, eyes glowing with sorrow older than nations. The wizard. When morning came, the fever broke. Urindor awoke changed. He could hear things now, truly hear them. The groan of old beams carried memory. The creak of leather spoke of strain and wear. When he stepped outside, the earth itself seemed to murmur beneath his feet, a constant low chorus he could not entirely shut out. The village noticed. He flinched at sudden noises. He answered questions before they were asked. Once he warned a farmer of a loose roof beam moments before it collapsed. Whispers followed him like shadows. He listens too closely, someone muttered. Forest touched, said another. Unclean, whispered a third. His aunt saw it too, the way he stared toward the trees. The way he sometimes paused mid-sentence, head tilted, as if listening to someone no one else could see. You went near the forest, she accused one night. Urindor did not deny it. She wept then, not loudly, but with the quiet grief of someone who already knew the ending. It takes people, she said, always has. I don't think it wants to take me, Urindor replied. That's worse, she said. 2 nights later, the forest called him again, this time without subtlety. The ground shook faintly, roots cracked stone. A wind rose that bent trees toward Greymark like reaching hands. People woke screaming as doors rattled and windows shattered. And through it all, Urindor heard the voice, clearer than ever. Come. He stood in the doorway, cloak in hand, heart pounding. If I go, he whispered into the darkness, will you hurt them? The forest paused. Not if you walk willingly. He kissed his aunt's forehead as she slept, tears blurring his vision. Then he stepped into the night. At the forest's edge, the stone marker glowed faintly, its carved word burning like an ember. Remember. Urindor crossed the boundary. The forest closed behind him, and far within Valhalla forest, beneath the ashen canopy, the wizard opened his eyes. The wizard beneath the ashen canopy. Valhalla forest did not welcome Urindor the way stories claimed it welcomed sacrifices, with sudden violence or consuming darkness. Instead, it accepted him with unsettling calm. The moment he crossed the boundary, the air changed. It thickened, carrying weight and memory. Moonlight fractured through overlapping branches, breaking into pale shards that shifted as he moved, never quite lighting the ground beneath his feet. The forest floor was soft, layered with centuries of fallen leaves, yet firm enough to guide him forward, as if the land itself had decided where he should step. Urindor felt watched, but not hunted. Roots rose slightly ahead of him, forming a natural path where none should exist. The thorns withdrew as he passed. Low branches lifted just enough to avoid scraping his face. The forest was not merely allowing him passage, it was preparing him. "You said you wouldn't hurt them," Urindor murmured, glancing back once toward the unseen village beyond the trees. "We keep our bargains," the forest replied, "better than men do." He swallowed and continued. Time unraveled inside Valhalla forest. Minutes stretched into hours or collapsed into moments. Urindor could not tell which. His legs should have ached, his lungs should have burned, but fatigue never fully claimed him. Each step seemed measured, necessary, guided by a will older than fear. As he ventured deeper, the forest changed. The trees grew taller, their bark pale and scarred, streaked with silvery veins that pulsed faintly like slow-moving blood. Leaves thinned, giving way to ash-like fragments that drifted lazily through the air, settling on his cloak and hair. The silence here was profound, not empty, but concentrated, as though sound itself had been deliberately withheld. "This is where you live," Urindor whispered, unsure why he spoke aloud. "This is where he waits," said the forest. The ground sloped downward into a vast clearing. At its center stood something that did not belong to nature, yet was undeniably part of it, a tower grown, not built. Its walls were formed from twisted trunks fused together, bark smoothed into spiraling patterns. Windows opened like watching eyes, glowing faintly from within. Above it all spread the ashen canopy, massive trees arching inward, their branches interlocking to form a dome that blocked the sky entirely. At the heart of the clearing stood the wizard. He was taller than Urindor expected, tall but not imposing, slender rather than powerful. His robe flowed like smoke caught mid-motion, woven from fabric and leaf and something else Urindor could not name. His hair was dark, streaked with white not from age alone but from wear, from burden. His eyes, those were the strangest part. They glowed softly, not with fire but with recognition. "So," the wizard said, his voice calm and weary, "the forest has chosen again." Urindor's breath caught. The voice was neither young nor old. It carried centuries in its pauses. "You know me?" Urindor asked. "I know what you are becoming," the wizard replied. "That is enough." Urindor took an involuntary step back. "I didn't ask for this." "No one ever does," the wizard said gently. "That is why it works." The forest fell silent, as if holding its breath. "My name is Aelthric," the wizard continued. "Once that name meant something beyond these trees. Now it exists only here." Urindor struggled to find his voice. Are you the wizard of Valhalla Forest?" Aelthric smiled faintly, though sorrow shadowed the expression. That is what remains of me, yes. He raised one hand and the air shimmered. Images unfolded around them, memories pulled from bark and root and ash. Zurindor saw a young man standing where Aelthric now stood, his face unlined, his eyes bright with ambition. He wore simple robes, carried books instead of power, and spoke eagerly of understanding the world rather than ruling it. I was once a scholar, Aelthric said. The fool who believed knowledge was harmless. The vision shifted. The young Aelthric stood before kings and councils, demonstrating magic that healed crops, mended flesh, calmed storms. People praised him. They begged for more. They called me a savior, Aelthric said, and I believed them. The forest darkened. The images grew harsher. Aelthric was older now, commanding forces that bent land and life. Battles burned across the memories. Cities fell. The same magic that healed was twisted to destroy. I learned too late, the wizard said quietly, that power answers fear faster than wisdom. The vision changed again, this time to Valhalla forest as it once was, smaller, younger, restless. Aelthric stood at its center, wounded, desperate, pursued by those who once worshipped him. I ran here, he said, to hide, to survive. The forest answered. Roots wrapped around him, not in violence, but in promise. Magic surged, raw and ancient, binding his life to the land. I made a bargain, Aelthric admitted. I would protect the forest from men, and it would protect the world from me. Urindor felt a chill. You're trapped. Yes, Aelthric said simply, and so is the forest, bound to my failures, bound to my name. The vision faded. The clearing returned. Then why bring me here? Urindor demanded. Why now? Aelthric studied him closely. Because the forest is tired, and so am I. The wizard gestured toward the trees. For the first time, Urindor sensed strained roots creaking beneath unseen weight, leaves trembling not with wind but with exhaustion. The forest remembers everything, Aelthric said. Every bargain, every life it spared, every life it took. Memory is power, but memory is also pain. What does that have to do with me? Urindor asked. You hear it, Aelthric replied. Not as noise, but as truth. That makes you rare. The forest stirred in agreement. I cannot leave, Aelthric continued. And the forest cannot forget, but cycles can end. Zurindor felt dread settle in his stomach. You want me to replace you. Silence. Aelthric did not deny it. No, Urindor said fiercely. I won't be trapped here. I won't become a warning. Aelthric stepped closer, his presence heavy but not threatening. You misunderstand. I do not want a successor. I want an ending. He turned, gazing up at the ashen canopy. The forest has grown too powerful, too aware. It reaches beyond its borders now, pulling lives into its memory to sustain itself. That was never the bargain. You made it, Urindor said bitterly. Yes, Aelthric agreed, and I must be the one to pay for it. The forest shuddered. Ash drifted like snow. It will not let me die, Aelthric said, but it might let you choose. Urindor's heart pounded. Choose what? Aelthric met his gaze. whether Valhalla Forest remains a prison or becomes a grave. A crack of sound tore through the clearing, branches snapping, roots heaving. The forest's voice thundered, layered, and furious. No, the ground trembled violently. Trees bent inward, closing the clearing like a fist. Aelthric's expression hardened. It hears us, it knows what I intend. You said it keeps its bargains, Urindor shouted over the rising roar. It does, Aelthric said grimly, and it believes I am the bargain. The forest surged, magic flaring wild and bright. Lights flickered violently between the trees. Shadows twisted into half-formed shapes, memories with teeth. Aelthric raised his staff, its surface glowing with ancient runes. Listen to me, Valhalla, he commanded. You were never meant to rule. You were never meant to live, the forest roared back. Urindor fell to his knees as pressure crushed the air from his lungs. Visions flooded his mind, every soul the forest had claimed, every scream absorbed into bark and root. He felt its fear then, raw and immense. It was afraid of ending. Aelthric, Urindor cried, it's scared. The wizard hesitated, pain flickering across his face. So was I once. The forest's power surged again, but faltered. For a brief moment, silence returned. Urindor understood then. The forest was not evil. It was lonely. Bound to a single life for centuries, feeding on memory to survive, terrified of fading into nothing. I hear you, Urindor whispered, placing his hand against the ground. All of you. The forest stilled. Aelthric stared at him, awe breaking through centuries of weariness. You weren't chosen to replace me, he breathed. You were chosen to speak for it. The ashen canopy rustled softly, uncertain, and for the first time in centuries, Valhalla Forest listened to someone other than its wizard. Far beyond the clearing, unseen forces began to move. The balance that had held for generations cracked just slightly. The forest had not chosen a side yet, but it was no longer alone. When the forest chose a side, the forest waited, but waiting is never passive. The Valhalla Forest was older than nations, older than kings and roads, and older than the concept of right or wrong. It measured time differently, calculating every step of its existence like a patient predator. And now it had heard Urindor. It paused, considering. Branches shifted, roots flexed, and leaves quivered like a heartbeat. Magic pulsed beneath the soil, and the hum of the forest, low and deep, filled the clearing. Birds, beasts, even insects had retreated. The forest was silent in expectation. It did not take long for Urindor to realize this was not a test. This was judgment. He stood beside Aelthric, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on his shoulders. The wizard's eyes, dimmer than before yet still glowing faintly, studied him carefully. Now you understand, he said. It will judge us, but it will also judge you. Urindor swallowed, feeling fear he had never known. I don't know how. You do, Aelthric replied softly. It listens to your heart. The forest wants intent, not words. It knows when you lie, even to yourself. The forest stirred. From the shadows emerged shapes, long-limbed silhouettes that were neither tree nor human, shadows born of memory and magic. Some resembled men who had vanished near the forest's edge centuries ago. Others resembled twisted animals, unnatural in form, reflecting old fears. They circled the clearing silently, eyes glowing faintly like embers. You are the speaker. The forest's voice resonated through the roots and leaves, but your words must carry truth. Urindor's heart pounded. He lifted his chin, feeling the forest's immense attention press against him. I speak for them. For all of you, the lives you hold, the lives you've taken. A tremor ran through the forest, low and resonant, as if it considered his words. Do you know the cost? I do, he whispered, and I am willing to pay it. The shadow forms shivered. Some recoiled, some stepped closer. The air thickened, filled with the scent of damp earth, decay, and something faintly sweet, like blossoms long dead. Aelthric stepped beside him. Courage is not enough, he murmured. You must understand. The wizard raised his staff. Its runes glowed, illuminating visions that twisted across the clearing. Urindor saw fragments of the forest's long history. Villages disappearing into roots, soldiers crushed beneath ash, a child crying beneath a canopy of ghostly leaves, sacrifices made to bind the forest's power. The forest did not forget. Every wrong, every right, every act of survival or cruelty remained. The shadow forms shifted into more distinct figures. An old woman holding herbs, a soldier clutching a broken sword, a boy clutching his sister's hand. The faces twisted with accusation and hope simultaneously. They stared at Urindor, demanding a verdict he could not yet fully comprehend. Judge us, the forest's voice demanded, trembling like storm-tossed leaves. Urindor faltered. I cannot undo what has been done, but I can speak for you so the living knows your story. So the world cannot ignore what happened here. Silence fell. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, a single branch lowered, pointing toward a dense thicket at the clearing's edge. Then begin. Urindor stepped forward. He felt the forest respond to him, bending and flexing as he moved. Shadows parted to make way. The ground beneath him hummed in anticipation. Each word he spoke carried weight. He told the stories he had heard, the legends he had pieced together from villagers, warnings, the whispers in the wind, the dreams the forest had given him. They spoke of greed, of fear, of hope, of sorrow. He told of the children who vanished, the travelers who never returned, and the lives subtly preserved in Valhalla's memory. Every sentence seemed to solidify the forest's awareness. Some shadows recoiled, others softened, leaning toward him as if comforted by the truth. Aelthric watched, a mix of pride and sorrow in his gaze. This is what it has waited for, he said. Someone who listens without fear, someone who can bear its weight. Then the forest spoke as one, a chorus of rustling leaves and creaking roots that filled the clearing. You honor the memory, you understand the pain, we accept your judgment. And in that instant, Urindor felt the forest shift. Trees bent slightly, roots uncoiled, and the shadow forms began to dissipate, leaving faint traces of light where they had stood. The forest was no longer an accusatory force, it had made a choice. But the decision was not without consequence. The earth beneath the clearing trembled, as if acknowledging a shift in balance. Magic surged, and Urindor felt a pull at his chest, like invisible hands gripping his heart. He fell to his knees, gasping. Aelthric placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "It is not finished," the wizard said. "The forest has chosen a side, yes, but now the world must respond. What you just witnessed is not the end. It is the awakening." Urindor's mind reeled. Awakening. Aelthric nodded. The forest will extend its reach slowly, carefully. It will protect, it will judge, it will reclaim what it deems necessary. But it has listened to you, and that changes everything. The clearing quieted again. The forest seemed to sigh, settling into a new equilibrium. Sunlight, fractured and silvered, filtered through the ashen canopy. For the first time, Urindor noticed small blooms, white and faintly glowing, pushing through the forest floor. They shimmered as if in approval. Urindor rose to his feet, trembling. Then what now? Aelthric's eyes, weary yet resolute, met his. "Now you learn. You prepare. The forest has chosen you as its voice, but it cannot guide your heart. That is yours alone." A low, almost inaudible growl rolled through the clearing. A warning, a reminder. The forest remained alive, alert, and unpredictable. Zurindor looked out toward the edges of Valhalla forest, toward the world beyond. He realized that the path forward would not be easy. He was no longer a boy untouched by destiny. He was entwined with a force older than any king, older than the earth, and his choices would ripple far beyond the trees' reach. The forest had chosen a side, and that side was him, the spell that ends an age. The air in Valhalla forest was electric, charged with centuries of memory and magic. Every leaf, every root, every whisper of wind seemed to pulse in anticipation. Zurindor stood at the heart of the ashen canopy, flanked by Aelthric, the wizard who had been both guardian and prisoner of this living labyrinth. He could feel the forest thrumming beneath his feet, its heartbeat enormous, its patience exhausted. "You understand what must be done?" Aelthric asked, his voice softer than the wind, yet heavier than the roots themselves. Urindor nodded, though fear clawed at his chest. I think so, but it will cost something, won't it?" Aelthric's eyes reflected centuries of sorrow. Everything comes with a cost. The forest has lived for too long unchecked, feeding on memory, bending life to its will. Its cycle ends tonight, one way or another. We can only hope that what survives is worth the sacrifice. The clearing around them began to shift. Branches intertwined more tightly, roots lifting from the ground as if the forest itself was preparing to act. Aelthric raised his staff, the runes along its length igniting with a pale blue flame. The wizard's presence was immense, almost a tangible force pressing against the world. "You will speak the words," Aelthric instructed, "but you must truly mean them. The forest will listen, not to intent alone, but to conviction." Urindor swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every life absorbed by this place, the lost, the forgotten, the vanished. Faces flashed before his eyes. Children, travelers, soldiers, elders, animals, friends, strangers. Every memory the forest had claimed, every sorrow it had hoarded, every fragment of joy and despair, it all demanded acknowledgement. He stepped forward, placing his hands on the warm, pulsing ground. The roots curled around his fingers gently, as if supporting him. His voice trembled at first, but it grew steadier, stronger, as he spoke words no one had ever heard, words drawn not from magic, but from truth. I acknowledge you. I honor your memories. I release you from fear. I release you from anger. You are remembered. You are not forgotten. You may rest and you may live, but no longer at the cost of the innocent. This cycle ends. A hush fell across the clearing. Even the wind ceased. Leaves trembled, then slowly straightened. The shadow forms, the lost souls and memories that had lingered for centuries, paused as if weighing his words. One by one, they began to dissipate, leaving faint glimmers of light that drifted upward like sparks toward the canopy. The forest shuddered violently. Roots rose in protest. Branches snapped. The earth shook as if disagreeing with the declaration. Aelthric gritted his teeth, holding the staff steady, chanting words older than Urindor could understand. The forest resists, Aelthric muttered, his voice strained. It fears its own end. Urindor's eyes widened as the canopy above began to crack, silver light pouring through jagged openings. A low, resonant roar emanated from the deepest roots, a sound that carried centuries of sorrow and defiance. But still, he held his stance. I speak for the living, he whispered, feeling the words vibrate within him. I speak for the lost. I speak for all. A flash of brilliant blue light erupted from the staff, spreading outward. Roots and branches writhed, twisting, groaning, resisting the change. Then, as if acknowledging Urindor's will, they stilled. The forest's immense power began to dissolve in a controlled release, the energy dispersing into the air, the soil, the sky. Aelthric lowered the staff, exhausted. It is done, almost. Urindor stumbled forward, breath ragged. The clearing shimmered, reality bending around him. For the first time, he could see the forest as it truly was. Not merely a prison or a prison keeper, but a vast, sentient being, old, exhausted, and finally vulnerable. The wizard, Urindor asked, glancing at Aelthric. Aelthric smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and sorrow. I am no longer bound. The forest has accepted its new path. Its memory remains, but it will no longer consume. I can leave finally. The wizard's form wavered like smoke. The chains that had tied him to the land for centuries, the bargains, the magic, the endless stewardship, were dissolving. Aelthric turned toward Urindor, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. You will carry its memory, he said, not to control it, but to guide it. The forest will listen to you, as it did to me, but your choices will shape its future. Protect it, honor it, and do not fear its judgment. That is your burden and your gift. Before Urindor could respond, Aelthric raised the staff one last time. Light enveloped him, brilliant and white before fading into the air. When the glow cleared, the wizard was gone. Only his robe, gently resting atop a bed of roots, remained, a silent testament to the centuries he had endured. The forest exhaled. The ashen canopy shivered and slowly lowered, the jagged cracks sealing themselves as branches interlocked once more. Light filtered through more evenly now, soft and forgiving. The shadows were gone. The lost, the vanquished, and the fearful had been released. Durandor sank to the ground, exhausted yet filled with a profound calm. He felt the forest's presence no longer as a weight pressing down, but as a living entity, aware, responsive, yet finally balanced. For the first time in centuries, Valhalla Forest did not demand sacrifice. It only asked for care, for understanding, for memory held rightly. He rose, brushing ash from his cloak. Small shoots sprouted from the forest floor where the shadows had once lingered. Tiny blooms of silver and green, fragile but alive, glimmered faintly in the pale light. The forest had ended one age and begun another. Urandor walked toward the edge of the clearing, toward the world beyond. He felt the memories of the lost whispering softly in his mind, a gentle chorus of thanks. The wind carried their voices lightly, the way a lullaby drifts through a window. As he emerged from Valhalla Forest, the villagers of Greymark noticed the change immediately. Crops grew taller, streams flowed clearer, and the air seemed lighter. Zurandor returned not just as a boy who had entered the forest, but as a bridge between worlds, the living, the lost, and the eternal memory of Valhalla itself. He looked back once toward the dense trees and ashen canopy and whispered, "I will not forget, I will remember." The forest shivered lightly in response, a living sigh of agreement. And so, the cycle of fear ended, replaced not by forgetfulness, but by understanding. Magic remained, but tempered. Memory persisted, but no longer as a prison. Then somewhere deep within the heart of Valhalla Forest, Aelthric's presence lingered, free at last, watching, smiling faintly, and letting the forest breathe. Urandor turned fully toward the path home. The world awaited him, forever changed, as he carried the weight and the gift of centuries in his heart. Valhalla Forest endured, yes, but now it lived with balance, guided by those who truly understood it. The age had ended, and a new one had begun.
There's nothing else you need to listen for now. Just let your breathing stay slow and easy. If you're still awake, that's okay. And if you're drifting off, let yourself go gently. I'll be right here next time. Rest well, and good night.